So, hi everyone. I am Dawn McCaw, the Senior Career Specialist from the Career Resource Center, and the students I work with are Fine and Performing Arts. So, I'm so happy to do another session of Arts Chat. And today we are being joined by Wes Buchanan. And I'm just going to say a little bit about Wes. Wes is an artist who graduated from SUNY New Paltz in 2021 with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, so BFA, in painting and drawing. And since graduating from the arts program, they've worked in a variety of roles, all connecting back to the arts before landing their current role at Goddard's Spaceflight Center. Their work spans across multiple mediums, from oil painting to digital illustration and animation. So thank you so much, Wes, for being my guest today. And we'll just jump right into it. Although I do want to say, I looked at your website, and it was just amazing. So hopefully I can put that in the bio for the IG. But I wanted to say that, and you can say this about yourself, but you grew up in a family that with science kind of in their career. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. So hi everyone, I'm Wes. It's nice to be here. Super excited to be talking with Dawn today. So yeah, just jumping right into it. I have grown up in a family full of scientists and engineers, which a lot of people I think would expect that I got a lot of backlash in wanting to be an artist. I knew from the time I could hold things that I wanted to do art for a living. And I was very lucky that my entire family was in full support of that. I count myself extremely lucky for that, but I grew up listening to specifically my father talk about his time in the space industry. So he was a rocket scientist in the 80s and 90s. So he worked on building spacecraft, which is a really, really cool thing that someone gets to say they do. He stopped working in the 90s because the facility in New Jersey closed, which he would have continued doing it for the rest of his life if he hadn't put down roots where he was. But, my mom is also a medical scientist. She currently works in cancer cell therapy research. My older brother is a power substation electrical engineer. My dad is still a rocket scientist at heart. My whole family works in the sciences. So I'm a bit of the black sheep in that regard. But I
love it.
I've always loved
You
science.
don't hear it. You don't hear that often, like your dad is a rocket scientist.
Yeah,
And your mom with the cancer research, also amazing. I just wanted to add that I also work with science students, so this is just amazing to me in all ways.
Yeah.
So, and you work really with the intersection of science and art.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to jump in and feel free to say anything else about yourself, because I know everything you say today is going to be super interesting.
Thank you.
So, of course. So, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself as an artist? And anytime, you'll just tell your story, basically.
Yeah. So I went to New Paltz specifically for painting and drawing. I originally came in as a freshman thinking I wanted to do art therapy because I really liked the idea of being able to take art and use it to really help people in ways that are non-traditional. And I got in and they sat me down and they said, here's the coursework. And I went, that looks like a lot. I'm going to do something else. And that's not knocking the coursework, of course. That's just, as a freshman, I was like, whoa. So I diverted to be a more generalized route. So originally I was studio art, and I started my painting classes my sophomore year. And I remember my first painting professor, Robin Arnold, who is very near and dear to my heart. I got into the class and was told it was oil painting. And up until that point, I had done only acrylic. So I was very resistant to this change because in my head, I was like, I can do anything I can do with oil and acrylic. Oil is so complicated. I don't want to do it. And I fell in love very quickly. I now don't like doing acrylic painting. I am an oil painter exclusively. So
that's a great story.
Total change of heart. But I was so supported the entire way, particularly by all of my professors in the program. because learning oil for the first time is really hard. It's very complicated. The thing about acrylic is it's quick. It's water soluble, so you're using water as your medium to thin it. But acrylic dries as soon as you put it down, unless you're using an extending medium, but that's a whole other conversation. So oil was very different for me because it meant I had to exercise patience. And I was not good at that when I got to college. I was a very impatient person, and I will readily admit that. And
it's just interesting because you're not interested in learning the oil, and that kind of shows you are patient.
I was really resistant to it originally, and Robin was like, you're gonna learn, and I get the feeling you're gonna like it based on the stuff you do. And she was right. She was totally right. It's my favorite medium now, other than all things digital, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But as an artist, originally, before I came into college, I was a hyperrealism artist. So I wanted to capture everything as accurately as possible. I was really into doing tiny, itty bitty little detailed paintings. And by the time I was graduating, I was doing a lot more abstract work, which I never expected because I was, again, very resistant to change when I came in. And the program and my colleagues in the program really reinforced an air of learning and changing. And I'm, honestly still so grateful to the arts program for giving me the space to change, and for the better, in my opinion. I still love doing realism. I do, but abstract has really influenced how well I can do realism. So a lot of my body of work currently, as well as in the last few years, has focused on the subject matter of the interstellar. I am a huge space fan. I've loved space since I was little. Listening to my dad talk about building satellites definitely influenced it. But even outside of that, I liked the idea of all the things you can see out in space, and planets and stars and galaxies and nebulae and all these beautiful things that require looking off the planet. I really got into the science elements as I got into college. I took some astronomy courses. I was super grateful for those classes because they gave me a lot more of the scientific knowledge that I felt like I was missing as an artist. Because the aesthetics is one thing, the science informs the aesthetics. I love talking with people about being at the intersection of art and science, because a lot of people don't realize that art is everywhere in scientific fields. Every image that you all see come from Hubble, the James Webb Space Telescope. Any image that comes from them has been touched by artists' hands. Scientific visualization and color allocations to things like a picture of a nebula doesn't look like that in real life. What you're seeing is artists who are allocating color to different chemical compounds, or hydrogen is red, oxygen is blue. So you're seeing color maps of science, which has really just been super inspiring to my body of work as an artist for ages. I feel like I'm going to ramble. So that's a little bit about me as an artist. Is I'm a painter who loves space. That's pretty much the all-encompassing.
It's great. I love it. And I'm always talking to students about what's your end? Like, what are you interested in addition to your major? And so that you can piece together a career. And, I think, and we know that it's not siloed. When you're in the world of work, it's a lot of things combined and all your interests, which makes it so interesting. Yeah. I think this is such a great example of that. So thank you. Okay, so I know, right now you work at the Goddard Spaceflight Center. So I guess I'll ask you a little bit about that. But before, you also worked for a project. Was it Artemis for NASA? Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you got that position?
Happy to. So I'll just give the quick hand version of the story of how I started working at NASA. My senior thesis at New Paltz was about the two major satellites that my dad built when he was a spacecraft engineer. The whole thesis project was called Halo Orbit. I talk about it on my website. I think we'll have my website hyperlinked somewhere. I have a whole page dedicated to it. And as I was working on this thesis, my father decided to reach out to a bunch of his old NASA friends, people he was still connected with in the industry, to say, hey, my kid's making art about the stuff we built. If you want to see, what they do and how they talk about it, I gave a thesis presentation with the honors program at the end of my senior year. So I had a medium where I was talking about the whole project, and it was a Zoom call, and someone from NASA did show up. Her name is Dr. Nikki Fox, and she's a dear friend of my father's, and she is also currently NASA's head of science. So she's a pretty cool lady, and she came to my thesis presentation, and I saw her name pop up in chat, and I'm sitting in my dorm room, and my camera's not on yet, and I see her name come up, and I like glance at my roommate. My roommate's like, "Does that say NASA?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's crazy."
That's amazing.
So she came on a whim, and at the end of it, she turned on her camera, and the big NASA logo's behind her because she's in her office, and she says, "Your work has really touched me because, I had two smaller paintings as part of my thesis, one of which was called VIS, which stands for Visual Imaging System, which was an instrument on a spacecraft called Polar, and VIS was responsible for taking pictures of the Aurora Borealis, or the Northern Lights. So my painting is of the Earth view with the aurora." And Nikki comes on and she says, "Your painting VIS made me cry because VIS was the instrument my late husband worked on." So it was an immediate, super personal connection for her. Long story short, we became very good friends after that. I got to meet her. I had what I consider still the coolest dinner of my life, where I was invited down to her house to have dinner with the Science Mission Directorate of NASA. So, including herself, that was the Director of Earth Science, the Director of Planetary Science, the Director of Astrophysics. Nikki at the time was the Director of Heliophysics, which, for those of you who don't know what heliophysics is the study of the sun and stars. And I also got to meet her boss at the time, Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen, who was formerly NASA's associate administrator and head of science. And I got to sit down and have dinner with them. And we're sitting there, and I brought some of my paintings with me so Nikki could see them in person. And we're sitting there, and she turns to me and she goes, "So, do you feel like giving a shorthand version of your thesis to us?" And I have the most major NASA scientists on the planet turn to look at me, just like, "Oh, do we get to see that?" And I'm like, "Sure."
Oh,
So I got
oh
up.
my gosh.
I got up in front of them. I basically redid my thesis for them, and they were all super engaged. And I wasn't
Dinner?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
We
awesome.
went to Nikki's living room. I set up all my paintings. I had my iPad for my culminating thesis piece was a painting called Siblings, which was 8 feet by 6 feet. So I can't transport that thing particularly easily. So I had it on my iPad, and I gave my little thesis presentation, and they were all so engaged. And at that moment, it really clicked for me that scientists care about art. They really do. They're all so interested in it. They may not be able to speak the medium or create in that way, but they want it involved in their industries. I gave my little thesis. We sat down for dessert, and they're all talking about how they could integrate this kind of art into their programs, or like how we should do paintings at headquarters. And it was really fulfilling to get to sit and listen to these major scientists talk about art in science and how important it is. Fast forward
Amazing.
to June 2022. I start my first role with NASA, which is with the Artemis team, the Artemis communications team. For those of you who don't know what Artemis is the next manned missions to the moon. So it's essentially Apollo's follow-up. It's the sister project, hence why her name is Artemis.
I just have to interrupt you. I'm just like blown away with this conversation.
Thank
Sorry.
you. I consider myself extraordinarily lucky that I had the connection through my dad. And I'll talk about networking a little bit later in the chat here. But I start my role with the Artemis mission, which was super fulfilling. it was a bit different of a role than the one I'm in now. I was an artist on a communications team. So my role was a lot of reviewing PowerPoints and putting together, presentation decks, as well as working on things that would be launched as, informative um, papers for certain projects. I got to do a really cool online exhibition with the Artemis program, which is on Google Arts and Culture. I'll send the link so that you can post it if you would like, but it's also on my website. It was called 10 Things You Don't Know Are Flying Aboard Artemis 1. And it was about the CubeSats, which CubeSats are little shoebox-sized satellites that kind of get propelled out of other spacecraft to do different missions. But working on the Artemis team was really cool because I came in right at the tail end of Artemis 1. Artemis 1 had an extremely successful launch in November, which I got to attend, which was my first rocket launch. And it was kind of life-changing. That's not even an exaggeration. I've wanted to see a rocket launch since I was little. And for this one, I was 3 miles away from the rocket. We're sitting at Kennedy Spaceflight Center. The rocket is so close I can see the word NASA on the booster. And it launches. And for rocket launches out of certain areas, there's water buffers around the rocket ship so that, it's not overbearingly loud. And I see the sound wave coming at us across the water. I was like, this is gonna be crazy. And then it was. It was like the loudest thing I've ever heard, but not like you want to cover your ears, loud like your bone marrow is rattling. And I remember crying because I've never seen, first of all, I've never seen anything like that. Second of all, I've never heard anything like that. And third, it completely reinforced that I wanted to be in this industry long term, because seeing something that powerful and my brain immediately going to, how can I turn this into art? How am I going to turn this into an art piece? Was it just reaffirmed that I was in the right place. Some unfortunate circumstances happened, and I left the Artemis team in December, and 10 months later started my new role at Goddard Spaceflight Center with a group called Conceptual Image Lab, or CI Lab for short, which is how I'll refer to them for the rest of the talk here. And CI Lab is an artists team. It is 8 people. We are super small, and I'm finally an artist on a team of artists. It is a very different experience. I did image resizing and poster reworks for NASA's streaming platform, which just launched, and all of you should check out. It's called NASA Plus. It is a totally free streaming service that is available on all platforms, including like Apple TV, Roku. You can access it through NASA's website, nasa.gov. And it just launched. We're super excited to have it as a central location for all of our viewable media. But I started with Conceptual Image Lab just in October, and it is identifiably my dream job in the industry. In 2020, when I sat down and I started planning my thesis, and I said, okay, I want to work at NASA. How do I get there? Where can I go? I did a bunch of research, and I stumbled upon CI Lab. And in that moment, in 2020, I said, that's it. That's where I want to end up, because it was a tiny team full of artists and illustrators and animators, and they're really a powerhouse in the industry. It's an amazing team full of amazing talent. And I said, I'll try and land there like 5-10 years. And it's been 3, and I'm here, and I still can't believe it, if I'm being honest.
It's amazing.
So that's a little bit of my journey there. It all kickstarted from my thesis at New Paltz. So I could say oodles of wonderful things about New Paltz, and I probably will this entire call.
Oh, you're such an amazing alum. So, I'm fascinated how much the science is in your work, and it's really at the core of who you are, which comes across. It does also um, I don't know what the word is, but it also drives the point home that artists have their other interests that always inform their art, whether it's something that they went through personally or if they're, advocating for a special cause. It's never just, I don't want to say just, but it would be flat, I think, the art without being informed by your experience and your interests. So,
Yeah. No,
yeah, it's
I
amazing.
definitely, I feel like being an artist is taking yourself and putting it in a painting. I talked with my brother a
Yeah,
lot about how different school was for us, as him as an engineer and me as an artist. There was less pressure on me to achieve the A in the class than there was on him. With engineers, they have to memorize formulas. They have to put those formulas on paper. Then they have to use those formulas to solve complex issues. And that's a different kind of stress than an artist who takes their heart and soul and puts it on a piece of paper and then puts it up in front of a class with the risk of the class going, "This sucks. I don't like this. Here's 20 reasons why." It's a
yeah,
very different, it's a really different kind of educational experience for artists, because critique is a very unique thing, I think, and feel, because when you're getting
yes,
when you're getting critiqued by other artists, they all know what they're talking about. They know how to look at your work and say, this element doesn't work for these reasons. Whereas when I was on a communications team, and God bless them, uh, they didn't know how to talk to me about what I did. And that was just because to speak artist is to be an artist is to speak artist. So it was a lot of, I don't like this. Okay, why? I just don't. So it was a different kind of experience in that regard. But
right.
artists constantly inform their work through themselves. I feel like it's really hard to detach yourself from the art you're creating. We
I always,
inherently no, we inherently put our souls into it.
yeah,
That includes our experiences and our passions and our hatreds and everything else that makes us us, you know.
yeah, I've been to a few critiques in the department and I'm blown away that how well the students take the critiques. I have been here for 20 years. I have never worked with a student population that takes critique so well. And I mean, even people I work with, including myself, to take the critiques, really take it in, and then appreciate it so that, that they can take it in and make changes that that make sense to them. But I think that is such a transferable skill no matter where you work, because
Oh yeah.
I mean, the work is personal to the artist and they're getting, I don't want to say ripped apart, but they're getting
They
all this
are sometimes.
feedback.
They 100% are. I've walked out of critiques feeling like my heart's been broken, because when you make art, you're putting yourself in there. You're putting yourself in painting form on a canvas and then presenting yourself in front of a group of peers. And there's some pretty brutal critiques you can get, but I very firmly believe that because I could do that and I could take artistic critique, I can do anything. I I can put up with any critique someone could give me on my work, because nothing will compare to making a painting I am proud of and having everyone dislike it. Like
Yeah,
it's and it's critique is so important for building yourself as an artist. I think every artist that watches this can kind of agree with that. As much as we all say we hate it, it's necessary to building ourselves up, breaking ourselves down, and then rebuilding to be better. And I very much so think that, having lived through critique for 4 years, I can handle it better in a workplace environment, significantly so.
definitely, definitely. I felt like I needed to console the students. I was uncomfortable with
It's
it,
rough.
so it was rough. But yeah, I really appreciate it because I spoke with one student and she said, "Oh, but I really appreciate it." Like she was fine. I felt like had a hard time with it. But yeah, it was great to see, and it was great for me to take that away with how wonderful that's such a skill. And you can talk about it, but actually living it, I think, is that experience, like any
Yeah.
other experience, living it is so important. Um, yeah, so thank you for that. You've answered so many questions, so this is really great. Um, I would say, there's administrative skills, organizational skills, just things that you need to kind of do in the workplace. I'm wondering if that resonates with you, if there's any skills you think students should kind of hone
Yeah.
while they're in school.
So, in terms of an administrative outlook, um, make sure you're an organized person. I think, and I won't show what's on them, but I usually take sticky notes in my meetings with sub-sticky notes. I write everything out and then I consolidate into notebooks or I consolidate into notes on my computer. That's just how I work and how I function because my memory is good some days, but only some days. And being organized will really help in more corporate workspaces as well. I think a lot of people my age don't inherently like working in super corporate spaces. I work for the government and it's pretty rough in the way of administrative organization and all the steps you got to jump through to like access certain things. But that's a very specific thing. I work for the man, it very different than working for a smaller company that isn't a governmental body. But be organized and be self-driven. I think, it's I'm very lucky in that I work in my passion. So it's really easy for me to have that self-drive. Um, I think in terms of career advice, it's also really hard for artists to find a career that feels like it resonates with them. I had lots of discussions with my colleagues in the BFA program about how they would want to get into like the museum industry or like gallery shows. And that's a really intimidating industry for young artists because it's hard to get in. It's hard to get your foot in the door. And it can take work to get there. Um, and having drive to do it is really important. Don't let yourself ever get discouraged from doing what you want to do. Um, I feel like working for the government is hard because there's a lot of big asks and it you hear people say I work for the man and it sounds like it's harsh and it kind of is. NASA is the fun part of the government though. So they really, really care about their employees. My team cares very deeply about individuals and our ability to continue performing at high level. Keeping yourself organized is important. Keeping yourself driven is important. Um, have fun with your job, even if it's not fun. Find ways to make it fun because
I'm
otherwise,
having fun. I'm having an amazing time right now.
I, it's, I feel like the other thing, and I had this discussion with someone very recently, is it can be really scary to do your passion as your job because burnout's very real, particularly for us artists. Artistic blocks, real. I don't care what anyone says. I can't just make paintings on command. It's hard. It takes your whole body and your whole mind to make a piece of art. But you can find ways to involve art in your career that isn't your main job. I'm a weirdo in that all I do is art outside of work, in work, while I'm sleeping. I think I'm very unique in that I don't experience that burnout, or I haven't yet, crossing my fingers. But yeah, I know this is probably another question, but my biggest point of advice to give to current students, truly, is do not let anyone tell you no. Never let anyone tell you no. I think the worst thing that can happen if you ask someone something is they say no. And the best thing that could happen is they give you a response that changes the course of your career, that changes the course of your life. It was the same thing with meeting Nikki. Is I asked how I could work at NASA, or if it was possible to work at NASA. And the worst thing she could have said was, we're not really doing much of that right now, but check back in 3 years. And the best I got out of it was my dream job. And I didn't let anyone say, no, you can't do that. I didn't let anyone tell me, like, maybe there's better candidates. I felt in my heart I was the best candidate, and I wanted to pursue it, and I wanted to have it. It's the same thing with like applying to jobs, job markets, and applying to jobs right now is really scary, really intimidating, because I have friends who applied to 200 jobs in 2 months and got one interview. And it's because they were limiting themselves to what they were applying to. Apply to the job you think you'll never get because you're not qualified. My job with the Artemis role was listed as senior level, and I was 22 years old. I certainly not senior level, but don't let anyone stop you. They're the only person that really stops you in that moment is yourself, by having imposter syndrome or self-doubt, or thinking there's going to be someone better than me. So what? Try it anyway.
I'm so glad you said that, because I do hear of alumni who definitely have done the same thing. We have one that works at Lincoln Center, Kevin Burns.
Yep.
And he said
Kevin.
he wouldn't, everybody knows Kevin. He said he just applied at Lincoln Center, and he was like, I'm not going to get this. And he did. And so his advice is, you're your own worst enemy sometimes. So, you have a shot, but you don't have a shot if you don't apply. So that's great advice.
It's super important, particularly for artists. If you want to have a show in Chelsea someday, apply to a bunch of galleries. Send them notes, go to shows, show up, start talking to people. Say, hey, I'm insert name, and this is the art I do. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what you do. Connectivity and networking is really important. And talk with your professors about what they do and how they got where they got, how they got where they ended up. And
because that's networking.
You'll be really surprised by the stories they have. I mean, there are some professors in the arts program who are really senior and have had very full lives, full of doing all sorts of stuff. And you never know until you ask them. And it can feel really intimidating, but all it takes is one conversation, and you have no idea what it could kickstart. And I mean, the same thing can be said for...
likely they're going to love talking to you about it.
Oh, yeah.
That's...
Well, professors,
reach out.
In my experience, professors love students who are engaged. And, you don't have to like your professors. I have had a handful of professors that I didn't vibe with. I struggled to communicate with them. But the ones that I could talk to were instrumental to me. I could shout them all out right now. I probably won't, but I could. You all know who you are. And, it's important to talk to people. You never know the type of connectivity you'll get from that. I took a class called History of Rock with Dave Savitsky. Love that guy. And, it wasn't an arts class. My other piece of advice in college is have fun and take a bunch of random classes that have nothing to do with what you're going to do for the rest of your life, because you may find another passion. But I took history of rock, and I brought a box of Cheez-Its to the first class. And the professor called it out in front of the lecture hall of like 200 kids. I was like, why do you have Cheez-Its? And I was like, I'm hungry. What do you mean? And so he called me Cheez-Its as a joke for the rest of the semester. But for Halloween, he said, you better dress up as a box of Cheez-Its or I'm going to be really disappointed. So I specifically made a Cheez-It costume. And
awesome.
I got to class. I sat down at the bottom of the stairs, and he opens the door and sees me and closes it. And he comes in, he comes down. He was like, you're a person of your word. But I gave him the Cheez-It box as a joke. I had a note on the back of it that said, thank you for being such a cool professor. Mm-hmm. And he hung it up with his tour posters. He took it and he was like, you have no idea how much it means to have a student be engaged. This is kind of like this isn't really related to anyone's major. This is, a lot of people take it just to fill the space. So it's really nice knowing that you're engaged. And I was like, you're a really cool guy. I want to be engaged. Professors see you. when you are engaged with them, and it means the world to them, and you have no idea how much they could help you out in the long run in terms of who they can connect you with and the stories they have and the inspiration they could give. The other main reason I loved New Paltz was it was small, so I could talk to people without feeling like I'd get lost in the mix of people. You know, I miss New Paltz all the time, in case that wasn't obvious. I
Yeah.
could talk about it for ages. It
I
was,
mean, NASA's pretty cool. But
yeah,
yeah,
but
I can tell.
the arts program at New Paltz is really wonderful because the professors are really wonderful and they have so much to teach you. It's you just got to start talking to them.
Yeah,
Talk about what they do. Talk about why they like doing it. Ask them for advice. If you want to hang in a gallery in Chelsea, who can you talk to? Where can you start? And then
that's
go
great
do it.
advice.
Go do it. Apply to random things, email people, connect with random people on LinkedIn. That's what I do. And I've
Yeah.
been surprised at the people who have connected with me back. Just
Some,
random.
I don't think I don't think I realized this when I was younger. But it's when you connect with someone, you're also connecting with their network. Because if they
Exactly.
don't know something, they'll be like, I know someone who, and that's how you got where you are. And sometimes students especially, will look at somebody who's going to be at a talk and think, well, I'm not specifically interested in that. But then you talk to the person, you talk to the person, and you see all these connections. So it's, yeah, you say networking, it's really just having conversations. So
Yeah, I
yeah, that's
mean,
great.
that's also how I wound up here.
Yeah.
Was I went to the alumni event and I talked with Mark McFadden, and he said, "Your story's really interesting. I should connect you with Don McCaw for
Oh, right,
a
right.
live
Yes,
chat."
that's networking.
And it's
Yeah,
all about just simple conversation. You could have a conversation with a
yeah,
stranger on the street, and you never know where it'll go. That's the thing about careers in the arts too, is there's so many of us, and we're all really interesting people. And we all have things we want to say and things we want to do and art we want to talk about. And all you have to do is make the leap to start a conversation with someone. It can be hard for, I totally understand being introverted too, by the way. Like, I talking with people can also be super intimidating. It's a skill you learn to hone over the years. I feel like
definitely.
I've definitely gotten better with it in just the last two from working in the space industry, because there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of people you should remember, and there's a lot of people you won't, and
Yeah.
that's okay. It's all
And it's,
about practicing people skills.
yeah, it's good to put yourself outside of yourself and learn new things. I am also an introvert, but definitely have to be extroverted in, a number of capacities. And it's just a different energy level. So sometimes people think, if you're an introvert, you can't socialize,
Yeah,
and that's not true.
I no, not at all. I mean, I'm the most extroverted person I know aside from my father. But a lot of my close friends are very introverted people, but that
Hmm.
doesn't mean they can't talk to people. It just means
Right,
their
right.
their way of interacting with the people around them is a little different.
Yeah,
And there's nothing wrong with that.
yeah,
People skills is hard. It's something you have to
yeah.
train. And college is a really great place to do that, particularly in the arts program, because you're
Right.
in a community that cares about the same stuff you care about. And
Yeah,
it's easier
and
it's
yeah,
easier to talk to your peers than it is to strangers. So that's my other
right.
big piece of advice for current college kids is talk to the people in your program. Talk about what they want to do. Maybe you have aligned interests, you know.
Yeah, it's huge. That's huge. Um, I was gonna say something and I can't remember. So
It'll come back. It'll come back.
it'll come back in a minute. Oh yes, you were saying how art students and artists are passionate, and I meet with a lot of students, and definitely you're right. The passion takes you so far because you could be in another major and not have that passion, and the passion helps drive you. And so yeah, it's so true from what I've noticed as well, that passion.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
so
it's
thank you so much. Yeah, yeah, I
no,
didn't interrupt you.
you're good. You're good. No, I think art students are a particular, group. I I think I am so grateful for the group that I had in my BFA program in the studios all the time. We were a family, really. I was so lucky for that. But art
It's a
kids
lot
are
of your time that
it
you're creating
is.
art. Like you're in the
Yeah,
studio,
all the
so that's
time.
good.
My
Yeah.
senior year, I was waking up at 5 a.m. to go to the studios when no one else was in there, which was a great life hack. Because then I could bring my speaker and I wouldn't bother anyone. But yeah, I feel like I could
Yeah.
ramble for ages.
A a senior invited me to her studio last year, and going in there, it it was a different world for me. It was in Smiley,
Yep, that's where
and like
mine was.
upstairs, I didn't even know it existed. And just to go in, and I felt like I was kind of like sucked into this world that I just have never experienced. And to hear her speak about her work, and it was amazing. It was a totally different experience, and it made me think like, wow, I liked my major in college, but this was a world. So it was, it's just super exciting to see how it can, the interplay of career.
Yeah,
I wanted to thank you so much. This has been amazing. And yeah, thank you for giving your time today.
yeah.
And are you on the Orange and Blue Network?
Orange and blue. I might
You
be.
probably don't know of it. I'll send you a link, but it's a
Please.
networking site for New Paltz alumni where you can connect with other alumni, but also be a resource for students if they reach
Sure.
out to you. Oh,
Yeah, I would be
great,
happy
great.
to join
Thank
that.
you. All right. So, Wes, thank you again. Have an amazing day. And I'm having an amazing day just by talking with you.
Well, thank you so much for
All
having me.
righty.
It was lovely to get to talk
Of
about
course.
what I
All
do.
right.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.